alright. Many claim they like riding, but I know that they ain't. Right, alright. I go hard in the paint, yeah, homie, I'm a saint. Right, alright. Many claim they like riding, but I know that they ain't. They see the red and they call me a devil, but mind the treble, let me level with you. I used to idolize rappers that paint they face, but now I rock the blood of Christ ever since I've been saved by grace.
Alrighty, we are live now. Yes, we were a few minutes late. I was talking David's ear off. That was completely my bad.
Have you noticed that Wyatt always whines? Like he always complains about something?
I don't see a Wyatt.
That's House of Hikmah, man. He just yeah, that's House of Hikmah. He's a little kid. He's a little kid who watches videos. I don't know why he's even allowed to watch this stuff. Dude, go do your homework. Play with some G.I. Joe. Stop complaining.
All right. So what we'll do is we'll pull this video up and kind of watch this, which I can stop it at a point if you need it. And then we can kind of get your thoughts on it either after. It's really short, about under 3 minutes.
All right. This is the first time I'm seeing this, so I will be shocked when I'll do.
What
awesome.
is it? What is it? Bill O'Reilly says, "Let's do it live."
Yeah. That's cool. I have no idea.
Your thoughts are on this, that the qira'at are what are the qira'at to you, or what are the ahroof to you? Do you feel that these are just mistakes of the reciters?
Yeah.
What exactly are they?
That's what I think.
So I'm willing for the conversation to be charitable and say that all 7 of these modes that could end up in 33 different hard copies of the Quran are considered one Quran. But the part that I was trying to explain to Justin is that within these 33 different hard copies, there are different word substitutions that mean completely different things, but they're all considered from Allah.
Yep, I agree. Where's the issue?
But this was the thing that I was showing Justin, because a lot of Muslims do not realize that, and they think that it's only one hard copy of the Quran, and that is it.
No, traditionally, it's always been accepted that all the recitations of the Quran are from Allah. I guess it was just during the past, I don't know, man, during the past 50 years or so that people stopped really caring about alternative recitations. I don't know if alternative is the right word to choose, but like the Hafs recitation became really popular, and just people ignored the other recitations. But of course, if you go to like places like Morocco, the western part of the Middle East, you'll find the other recitations there. But yeah, so those are just some thoughts off the top of my head.
Now, I did have and I'm the guy who was explaining this argument to me. He laid it out much better than I'm going to lay it out to you. So if you're not gathering what I'm saying, then we can move on. But so there's chunks within the Quran where within these different modes, it's citing Moses, for example, but it seems to be making God cite Moses saying 2 different things. So how would you reconcile that? Would you say that God's not verbatim quoting Moses, but he's just trying to give you a generalized context? How would you reconcile that?
You don't even need to go into the different modes for that. You can find the story of Moses and Pharaoh in multiple different places in the Quran in which the words are not being repeated verbatim, which goes to show that it's all paraphrased.
And that is it. I didn't realize how bad my audio was till I got the speaker in my ears. I promise for anybody watching that I was not in the witness protection program while that recording was going on. That was a very overly tired me.
So it's a weird situation because I really don't believe that you can account for the different readings or recitations or whatever they want to call them. I just call them different versions of the Quran by saying that they all somehow go back to Muhammad. That is, I mean, that is clearly just an act of desperation. Fareed is wrong to say that it was always accepted that these always that all of these go back to Muhammad. You have the issue of the Ahroof, but that you have in the Muslim sources. Even that is a ridiculous explanation. If it actually came from Muhammad, you got two possibilities. One, that this issue was actually brought up to Muhammad, that people were reciting the Quran differently. So you have two different ways of looking at this. You could believe that this issue was actually brought up to Muhammad and he said, yes, Allah revealed the Quran in these different ways. There are so many problems with that I mean, it would be that would be a separate and independent reason to doubt that Muhammad is a prophet, if you actually take that explanation seriously. From a Muslim perspective, I mean, really, if I were a Muslim, I would say that's a later fabricate. It's so incredibly bad, that explanation, and casts so much doubt on everything Muhammad says, that if I were a Muslim, I would say this is a later fabrication, when later Muslims were figuring out what to do about different versions of the Quran, that they just made up quotations from Muhammad where he's saying that it's been revealed in these different ways. But with that said, you do have the claim that the different Ahroof, which no one knows what they are, they'll say dialects, they have no clue what they're talking about. Dialects doesn't even make sense, because the two people who were arguing about this spoke the same, they spoke the same dialect. So it doesn't make sense that they're actually reciting different dialects of the Quran when they spoke the exact same dialect of Arabic. But at least you have the claim that the different Ahroof go back to Muhammad. The different readings that are now in the that appear in the Qur'at. These, I mean, it's so obvious when it's not all of them, but you see over and over again the words in the different versions will look very similar. Right. Lots of times it will come down to where you put the dots, because you can get different words depending on where you put the dots. And as far as I know, the early Qurans didn't have the dots. And so usually you could tell by context what word is actually being used. But sometimes putting those dots in different places gives you a different word. And then lo and behold, you get these different words in different readings of the Quran. And they say, it all goes back to Muhammad. It's like, really? I mean, isn't there a much more obvious explanation here, that if you don't include the dots, then later people are going to put the dots in different places and so on? I mean, isn't that a much more obvious explanation than, these very similar looking words, which you get just by putting dots in different places, were somehow revealed in all these different ways and so on. So that's it's just a ridiculous explanation. But as far as the Ahroof explanation, that you can account for these by saying that Muhammad revealed them in these different ways. The hadiths where Muhammad tells this to his followers, so it gets brought to him, hey, this guy's reciting the Quran this way, this guy's reciting the Quran this way, what's going on? And Muhammad says, you go ahead and recite it. And so Umar recites it, and then he tells the other guy, okay, you recite it. And the guy recited it, and Muhammad says, it's been revealed in both these ways. And you've got the hadith where he says it's been revealed in 7 different ways, and everyone is shocked by this. And why this is relevant is the guy who was in a bit of trouble with Umar for reciting the Quran differently. That guy was a convert to Islam. He converted after the conquest of Mecca. So this is post 630 AD. This is shortly before Muhammad's death. It gets brought to his attention, hey, people are reciting the Quran in different ways. And that's when and this is causing doubts. Notice no one has any clue about this, because they're bringing it to Muhammad like it's this big news. Hey, I'm about to mess this guy up here. I'm about to mess this guy up because he's misquoting the Quran. And Muhammad's response is, Allah revealed it in all these different ways. It's like, wait a minute. So this is 630 AD, let's say. You've been revealing the Quran for 20 years in 7 different ways. And no one has any clue about this? Are you serious? You've been revealing the Quran for 20 years in 7 different ways. And the only time anyone figures this out is when you tell them, because people were reciting the Quran in different ways. Wouldn't his followers know? I mean, wouldn't his followers know about this? If he's walking out there saying, here's the new verse. Okay, this is version 1 of this verse. All right, now I'm revealing version 2 of this verse. All right, now I'm revealing version 3 of this verse. If he's revealing the Quran in all these different ways, wouldn't someone have been familiar with this? And yet it's a shock to the Muslim community. Oh, he's been revealing the Quran in all these different ways. So guys, what's more likely? What's more likely here? That Muhammad, option A, Muhammad spent years revealing the Quran in different ways to all kinds of different groups, and no one ever noticed until it was brought to him that someone was reciting the Quran differently. And then, yes, what are you talking about? What are you guys complaining about? Of course I was revealing the Quran in all these different ways. That's option A, which is the option that people like Fareed go with. Or option B would be Muhammad's memory was not perfect, and later, so he's revealing these verses at one point. He reveals, he quotes it to a later convert to Islam, but his memory wasn't perfect. He misquoted it. This guy starts reciting it in the way Muhammad misquoted it, and then you ended up with differences in the Quran. The reason that fits is you don't end up with the absurdities of thinking Muhammad's revealing the Quran all these different ways and no one's ever familiar with it. You don't end up trying to explain it in terms of dialects when the people arguing over the Quran were people who spoke the exact same dialect. But it also fits with the fact that we know Muhammad's memory wasn't perfect. I mean, there are hadiths where Muhammad says, oh, I want to thank so-and-so for reminding me of these Quran verses that I forgot. It's like, okay, if you can forget verses, then you can not, it's possible to not remember verses perfectly, right? I mean, if you can forget the entire verse, then you could misremember a verse later on that you're reciting. It's very easy to do. So anyway, that's the explanation of the Ahroof. And again, if Muslims want to say that explanation actually goes back to Muhammad, I would say you've got a pretty devastating critique, especially when you combine it with all the other things. But here's a guy who, when it's brought to his attention that he hasn't been delivering the Quran perfectly to his followers because his own memory is flawed, he makes something up about Allah. And that's his go-to method. He makes something up about Allah to escape the problem. That sounds silly and ridiculous. So it's clear that he's just making things up, blaming Allah. And even in the hadiths where he would forget Quran verses and say, "Oh, I thank so-and-so for helping me remember these verses that I'd forgotten." He actually says that Allah made him forget those verses. And so the idea is Allah would periodically make Muslims forget verses because he wants to abrogate them. But then, wait a minute, why is he thankful to this guy for remembering verses, helping him remember verses that he believes Allah caused him to forget in order to abrogate them? It's like insane. So if Allah wants them abrogated, then Allah is supposed to erase them from the memory of the Muslim community. But this guy's memory is apparently more powerful than Allah's ability to make people forget things. So one guy remembers the verses that everyone else forgets. And then Muhammad is thankful to him. And it's, thank you. Allah made me forget those. And now you've brought them back to my attention. It's like, wait a minute. If Allah makes everyone forget them, then Allah wants to abrogate these verses. Why would you be happy that this guy reminded you of verses? Why would you be happy that there's this guy whose memory is more powerful than Allah's ability to make people forget? This is like insanely ridiculous. That's the Ahroof. You have the different versions of the Quran later on. And the Muslim commentators actually for a long time took these as just variants, took these as different reciters, and the people who are writing down the recitations are making some mistakes and so on. So it's actually a more recent idea that these all go back to Muhammad. And then even more recently than that, you have the claim that there's only one Quran perfectly preserved down to the letter. But notice some of the problems. If in the hadith, when Uthman is compiling the Quran, the order when they're putting out an official version of the Quran is to write everything in the Quraysh dialect. Anytime if you have a difference of that you can attribute to dialect, Uthman says the order is write everything in the Quraysh dialect. Well, guess what that should mean? That should mean that all these different dialects are gone. So if Allah reveals it in 7 dialects, again, that doesn't make any sense, but that's what Muslims will claim. If Allah revealed it in 7 different dialects, guess what? Uthman got rid of 6 of those dialects, which, that's amazing that Allah wants the Quran revealed in these 7 dialects. And then a caliph can just say, let's get rid of 6 of them. I think that would be problems for perfect preservation of the Quran in itself. But then notice, if Uthman is saying, hey, we want 1 dialect, how do you now explain differences in the Quran in terms of the different dialects, in terms of the different Ahroof? Umar got rid of them. He cleansed them. He put them through a filter and said, okay, only Quraysh dialect. And so years later, here we are centuries later, and we say, look at all these differences in these different Qurans. And the explanation is, that's because of the different Ahroof. I was like, wait a minute, Uthman got rid of them. Uthman put it all out in the Quraysh dialect. How are you explaining this? And by the way, this is really why Sheikh Yasser Qadhi got into trouble. We all took the sections where he's saying the standard narrative has holes in it. And we were pointing out that, this destroys the narrative of perfect preservation. But what he was saying in there that got him into trouble, he was saying that when so you've got your average popular level Muslim, they think the Quran's been perfectly preserved right down to the letter, because that was the lie that was told to them by their Dawah guys and scholars who knew they were lying. Matter of fact, that was told to them by people like Sheikh Yasser Qadhi, perfect preservation right down to the letter. So that was the lie that was told to them, but that's what they believe at the popular level. And Sheikh Yasser Qadhi was pointing out that as you learn more, once you're a student of knowledge, then you find out about differences in the Qurans. You find out about, textual variants and so on. And you find out about the different qira'at and so on. And he said that when you find out about these things, your scholars are going to give you an explanation. They're going to say, oh, it was revealed in these different ways. Oh, it's the Ahroof. Oh, it's this and that. And he says, and you're going to believe them. And he says, but Western scholars are actually coming and challenging our explanations. And he said, and he said, in effect, the Muslim explanations actually can't stand up to scrutiny. They don't work. And you're being poked. He says, you're being poked by these Western academics who are saying, actually, that explanation doesn't work. So it would be simple stuff like, okay, if Uthman got, had everything in the Quraysh dialect, how can you explain this in terms of different dialects? How are you doing that? And so non-Muslim scholars are poking holes in the standard Islamic narrative, because even Muslim scholars are inclined, especially when they're being pressured and they can't do anything else or they'll get in trouble, as Yasser Qadhi did. They're pressured to just accept any explanation. Oh, it's because of the Ahroof or something like that. And it doesn't make any sense, but they have to go with it. He said the non-Muslim scholars, they don't have that red line. They'll just say, that doesn't work. That doesn't make any sense. And Yasser Qadhi was agreeing with the Western academics that the explanations don't work. That's what got him into trouble with people like Farid. And that's what got him in trouble with the Muslim community, saying it just doesn't work. And he's still in trouble with it. And they're calling him, people are calling him a non-Muslim and an apostate and a heretic and everything else because of what he said in that video, when all he's doing is being honest. The explanations don't work. And if Farid and anyone else Farid wants to get, anyone else, he can get 50 Muslim scholars to join him. I will sit there. He can explain it to all of us. I will sit there. The apostate prophet will sit there. We'll sit there, and we're going to have some questions. Of course, we're going to ask for we're going to have some questions. We're going to ask for some clarifications. We're going to bring up some passages. We're going to bring up some issues that they can respond to. But think about this. If Yasser Qadhi is wrong, and you can explain all of this in terms of things that ultimately go back to Muhammad, great, explain it to us. I don't see how you can reasonably accept that position. It sounds absolutely insane and just made up in order to claim that you still have miraculous preservation of the Quran when you have your book has all the features, all the characteristics of a book that was copied by human beings, and human beings make mistakes. Your book has all the features of that. You just want to call them different things in order to pretend that your book is in a different category and it's miraculous. You still want to cling to that. Well, fine. I don't think you can, but it's an open invitation to any Muslim scholars out there. Fareed, assemble your crew. I'm not an expert on this. I'm not an expert on this. So, I mean, these guys should be able to run circles around us and explain everything and explain how all of this goes back to Muhammad. We keep asking them, we keep inviting them. They will not do it. They want to keep it quiet. They have the same mentality of Yasser Qadi. You should not be having these discussions in front of the Muslim community. Yasser Qadi's reasons was Muslims are going to get confused. They're not going to understand it. They're eventually going to find out that the explanations don't work and you're going to destroy their faith. So stop talking about it. And then Fareed says, no, we can explain it. We say, okay, come explain it to us. And never wants to do it. That's strange.
Yeah, the academic that you guys had on, you and AP, a month ago, maybe not quite a month ago, Dr. Khalil Andani, from his academic perspective, at best, what he'll say is that the Quran, that the skeletal frame is preserved. But he won't go and say the whole entire Quran in entirety. Like he'll say the skeletal structure, which is kind of a weird way to put it. Like if you think of it, the skeletal structure of a cat, well, there's a lot more that could like deviate how the cat looks or how the cat's presented outside of it. Could be dark, could be light, could be longer hair. So when I hear like the skeletal structure is preserved, I don't know how anybody can call that perfect preservation.
Yeah. So, I mean, there are a couple issues here. One, I don't have a problem with claiming that the Quran has been well preserved, even though you have these variants. That's not what I'm responding to. I think the Quran has been pretty well preserved. You can look at like the Sanaa palimpsest and you have all these variants, but you're not getting a different Islam. You're not getting some sort of radically different Islam. You're getting things where you have different words and stuff. And you can see why people would make some of these mistakes and so on. So I don't even regard it as a terrible problem. I think any book that you're copying, if you're copying a book, so here's Ibn Ishaq. If you and I were to both copy this book down by hand, if you then put our copies side by side, there are going to be differences. There are going to be differences. There are going to be spelling differences. There are going to be misspellings. There are going to be textual critics actually have names for these things. It's like when you see a word or a phrase and you're copying that word or phrase, sometimes, 3 verses later, there's the same word or phrase, and a copyist will just accidentally leave out a section or something like that. These are the kinds of issues. In other words, he sees the phrase and then he copies it down and then he looks back, but he looks at the wrong one, even though it's the same phrase, and then keeps copying. And so you have mistakes like that. You have words that can be spelled differently. So sometimes when books were being copied in the ancient world, you would have someone who's instead of reading one manuscript and copying another, you would have a person reciting it and another person copying it down. Right. So a person is reading out loud one copy and another person is writing it down. Well, what can happen in that situation is you end up with spelling differences because there are words that you can spell in different ways and so on. So it's no great mystery how you can end up with variants if you're copying a book by hand. I don't regard it as a problem. It's only a problem for two things. One, if you say perfect preservation right down to the letter, dot for dot, and so on, that's ridiculous. Anyone who said that, who was at all familiar with the history of the Quran, anyone who said that was knowingly lying. They're like Yasser Qadi he knew he was lying. He believed that he had to lie for the good of the Muslim community. Your average Muslim, when he's telling you that, your average Muslim believes it. So he's not deliberately lying, even though he's saying something false. He's not deliberately deceiving. He believed it. He believed what his scholars told him. So yeah, it's just this, I mean, the problems that I have, one, if you are trying to maintain perfect preservation right down to the letter, that's ridiculous. And two, can you really explain all these differences by saying that they all go back to Muhammad? I don't believe they can, although I am completely open to Muslims explaining this. But yes, if you have people at the scholarly level, and I don't mean like, you know, Al-Azhar or something like that. I mean like a Western academic like Khalil Andani. He's not going to go with the silly, ridiculous explanation that people like Fareed go with. He's going to go with the most straightforward, obvious explanation, which is, hey, what do we know about people who copy books by hand? They occasionally make mistakes and you end up with textual variants. Is that a problem? Well, as long as you don't burn all the Qurans or so notice Uthman had all the copies of the Qurans burned to cover up these things. And then when they came out with the 1924 Cairo edition, they took tons of Qurans and they sunk them in the Nile to cover up those variants and so on, so they could put out their official version. But these are just the things that you notice. If you want to do textual criticism, the more manuscripts you have, the better. The more manuscripts you have, the better. Because if someone makes a mistake, if a copyist makes a mistake, and you have 1,000 copies, and only one copy has that mistake, yeah, it's a pretty good indication that that one person made a mistake. But if you take that one copy and then you burn all the rest, or you drown all the rest, then you're losing the ability to do textual criticism. That seems to be the goal in Islam for lots of, I mean, from the time of Uthman, even towards recent Muslims who are claiming one Quran, is to just cover up the fact that you have all these differences. But notice, if you're doing that, then you don't have to do textual criticism, but that means you're going to have quite a bit of trouble getting to any sort of original reading if you are destroying manuscripts.
Now, for anyone looking at the screen, I pulled up this website that was just one of the coolest things that I was given a few years back. I think you're familiar with it too, David. The Answering.
Oh yeah, that's Samuel Green.
.org. Yeah.
Yeah, that's Samuel Green. He is the Christian apologist dealing with Islam in Australia. If you go back like 15 years, there were like, I mean, you could count on like 6 or 7 fingers the number of people who are really dealing with Islam. You had Samuel Green in Australia. You had Tony Costa in Canada. You had a couple of us here. You had Jay Smith in the UK, but there were not a lot of people who were like spending a lot of time dealing with Islam. But Samuel Green's been doing this a long time. Very, very nice, friendly guy too. He's not mean like you and me.
This is also, according to Muslims that I talked to, a very Islamophobic website, which is code for we don't want you to read this or ask questions from it. But I wanted to share this with the audience. Answering /Islam.org. I'll put it in the video description later. You can go through this, and it'll actually talk about like the different Qurans in use today as we're scrolling down. And then it'll compare different wording from 2 printed Qurans. Because I wasn't kidding when I told Fareed that a lot of Muslims that I talk to just don't know that. They just don't know that there's any difference at all. And then when they find out, it's a shock. There's this Clubhouse app that a lot of us go on to, and we do interfaith apologetics work. And at least half the Muslims don't know about this.
And they have a better chance of knowing about it now that Muslims are kind of scrambling to fix the damage that's been done by the lies that have been told. So you do have people like Fareed talking about this and so on. So they have a better chance of hearing about this than they did like 10 years ago. But it's still, at the end of the day, there's a much better chance that they have to hear it from us. So everyone just needs to have material like that ready. Like you can have that article and take screenshots of variants in the Quran. And show them to Muslims, but you have to have them handy. And keep in mind, that was actually what led to the holes in the narrative interview. Was just you let me put it this way. You have different approaches. If you want to show that the Quran hasn't been perfectly preserved, you have a few different ways that you can go. The way that Nabil and I always did it, we just quoted the Muslim sources. So we quoted passages in Kitab Fada'il al-Quran, where they talked about hundreds of verses. They couldn't find hundreds of verses just from Surah 33 alone. You have, even in Sahih Muslim, Abu Musa talking about 2 entire chapters of the Quran that were lost. And he says, because Muslims hardened their hearts. So Muslims will look at that and they'll say, that's abrogation or something. It's like, wait, he's saying that they hardened their hearts. They hardened their hearts. They didn't recite them. And he's warning other Muslims not to do that so that they don't lose more of the Quran. You have the fact that the entire reason for putting the Quran into book form was that they realized they were losing parts of the Quran because human memory is flawed. In other words, the entire project of preserving this by memory ended in disaster and ended up in large parts of the Quran being lost forever. They said no one remembered these passages of the Quran after these guys died in battle. And so these are the things that we would quote. We would go, oh, look, here you have it. Sunan ibn Majah, 1944, says that Aisha's sheep ate some verses that are now no longer in the Quran. So we'd point those out. But Muslims would always just say, oh, those have been abrogated or something like that. So you had that approach. Then you have people like Dan Brubaker who would take a manuscript approach. So they would put manuscripts up on the screen and say, look, here's a manuscript. Here's a page of the Quran. Here's a manuscript. Look at this. This verse is not what it says in your Quran today. Look, that is not what your Quran says today. So it's clear that there have been variants in the history of the Quran, and it's more extreme with something like the Sanaa palimpsest. But you also get this with even though you don't still have, they eventually faded out of use and were lost, but you don't have the version, Ubay ibn Ka'b's version of the Quran. You don't have Abdullah ibn Masud's version of the Quran. You don't have those anymore. But we know what a lot of the differences were because Muslims actually recorded textual differences between these different versions of the Quran. So, you can actually show in the history of the Quran that there were differences in the Quran in terms of manuscripts and so on. So one, you could go to the Muslim sources and show your sources talk about these problems with the Quran and changes in the Quran. You can actually go to manuscripts or to different versions of the Quran that are no longer that we no longer have, but that differences were recorded. Or you can look at different Qurans in the world today. So you have those different approaches and different Qurans in different parts of the world today. That's what Hatun did. Hatun just got sick of it and showed up with a pile of Qurans that she said she just picked these up in Muslim bookstores in different parts of the world and started noticing there are variants in them. And then she actually shows up and starts putting them in Muslims' faces. Look, here's this Quran. This is this Quran. Here's this one. Is that the same word? And one of the early accusations was you must be printing these Qurans yourself in order to cover up the perfect miraculous preservation. Eventually, Muslims started finding out about this, and what do? They run to the same Dawah guys who lied to them and told them perfect preservation right down to the letter. How do we explain this? And so initially it was, that's because of different dialects. And so they ran back to speakers going, it's different dialects. It's just different dialects. And then it's got shown, no, this is not a different dialect. This gives you a different meaning here. This means something different. And so that didn't work. And eventually they start asking their scholars, and Farid is actually partly responsible for the Holes in the Narrative interview because he's the one who leaked Yasser Qadhi's private messages to his private group, where he was apparently pointing out that he didn't think these things, that their explanations could account for these. And then you have tactical genius Muhammad Hijab. Muhammad Hijab decides he's going to clear all this up. He's going to get Yasser Qadhi in a live stream and have Yasser Qadhi explain himself. And Yasser Qadhi's going to explain how the Quran has been perfectly preserved. And instead of saying that, Yasser Qadhi says, our explanations don't really work. And it was a disaster. And so it's all falling apart right now. But that is where we are at right now. They're still scrambling to cling to some amazing, miraculous preservation by saying it all goes back to Muhammad. And it just doesn't work.
And then we have a super chat, which I love the username too. Happy Camper. I remember as a kid, like people would use that analogy, and he's just a happy camper. But I whenever I went to camp, I was miserable. Now I enjoyed being out in the woods and doing all that stuff, but they would never let us actually do things in the woods. It was like always off the side, always in the fenced-in area. But his question was, so what's Islam going to do now that its lies are being debunked?
What do you think it's going to do?
I've seen a shift. I've seen to where, like, they're saying this is what we've always taught, or this is what's always been presented.
I've seen that too. I've even seen like when Fareed called Yasser Qadi a liar, because I was calling him a liar, and Fareed said he agrees with me. I looked at the comments, and the comments were saying things. Oh, now David's acting like we haven't always been familiar with the Qur'an. And it's like, wait a minute. For the past 20 years, you guys told me perfect preservation right down to the letter. And now all of a sudden we expose that. And oh, we've always known about this. Oh, great. If you've always known about this, then you've always been lying when you said perfect preservation, dot for dot, letter for letter. And when Sheikh Yasser Qadi said things like there's not even a single letters difference between two Qurans, any two Qurans from the time of Uthman down to the present, that's all lies. I've got Muslim apologetics books where there's only one Quran. You will never find any difference, not one letter between any two Qurans. That was all a lie. And then the lie eventually gets exposed, and they say, oh yes, of course, we know about differences in the Quran. Okay, so you're saying you were lying. You knowledgeable Muslims were lying to the people who didn't know anything. That tells us something. But notice, so you had the mathematical miracles argument that broke down. Even Yasser Qadi and some other Muslim scholars exposed that, and they're saying, guys, this is ridiculous. Stop using this. You have the perfect preservation that has broken down. They're still trying to cling to a diluted version of it by saying that, yes, there are all these differences, but they all go back to Muhammad. That's not going to work. So that is eventually going to break down. Then you have Ali Dawah admitting that the scientific miracles have been debunked. And so it looks like their arguments are falling very, very rapidly, much more rapidly in the past. Because think about how it was in the past. Zakir Naik stands up in front of 10,000 people, spouts complete lies. I mean, you Muslims who do not know enough about the things that Zakir Naik is talking about to know how much he's lying and how much he's getting wrong and how sloppy he is and how deceptive he is. You don't realize what he sounds like to anyone who has any clue what he's talking about. He sounds like the biggest liar we've ever heard. Nabil once made a video, Zakir Naik, 25 errors in 5 minutes. He just went through a 5-minute clip of Zakir Naik and found 25 factual errors. I mean, factual mistakes. So Zakir Naik's just blurting stuff out, but he'd been conditioned to do that because he knows he's got a crowd that mindlessly agrees with whatever he says. So that's the situation that we were in 20 years ago. Zakir Naik says something. He'll say it to 10,000 people. Who's going to expose him? Do you have any idea how long it takes for us to go to, how long it would take for us to go to each one of those people? Because those 10,000 people don't then go to a lecture by us or something like that to see the lies exposed. They go to see Zakir Naik. So they're being fed a constant diet of lies, but they're not going out and seeing the responses to the lies. And so this just encouraged this became the basis for the modern Dawah, is just lie as much as possible. Just keep lying and lying and lying. If you lie to 10,000 people and one of them eventually finds out that you're lying, so what? You deceived 9,999 people. One figured out that you're a liar. Who cares? Those other guys can shout him down now or kill him if he objects too much. But you don't have to, just keep lying and you'll be good. Then we get the rise of the internet, and you get we start exposing these things, and now they're breaking down at an extremely accelerated rate. Things that might take us decades to expose, if you go back, now are falling left and right. And so that is a good question, given the history of the Da'is and how they act. If you say, okay, if their lies are being exposed, what are they going to do now? I don't know that they have a plan B, right? Dawah is just lying. That's what it's become, making things up to support Islam. Inspiring Philosophy just made a video today where they're saying they have this 1,500-year-old Bible, and oh no, it's 1,800 years old. Oh, now it's first century, and it's all, you can actually read it right there. It says in the year of our Lord 1500 AD, right on the cover. It's like, wait, it says it's made in 1500 AD. and you look at 1500, you're saying, oh, it's 1500 years old, as if someone wrote in the book, this is 1500 years old. It doesn't make any sense. And then they keep exaggerating it to act like they've got some original Bible that goes back to Barnabas. And it's just lies, right? It's like, I mean, it's amazing. Any of these Dawah guys could stand up right now with a sheet of paper with some scribbles on it and say, look, scholars have found the original Bible and it agrees that Jesus is just a Muslim prophet. And it would be spread to millions of people overnight, and they would all be celebrating it, saying, oh, alhamdulillah, this is the proof that Islam is true. But we can now expose that lie much more rapidly than we could 20 years ago. And so I guess they're going to keep lying for a while. And now that they're getting extremely desperate and don't know what to do, they're gonna cling more and more to people like Andrew Tate and Sneeko. And keep in mind, these are the first fruits of the new Dawah breakdown, because other people are going to be doing this. Because all of a sudden, you can get a ton of attention if you just say, "I'm a Muslim now," and it's becoming an in thing to do for influencers. But I think you're going to be seeing more of that. But it's pretty hilarious to watch. And if they hadn't spent decades lying and of course threatening and intimidating people, you might actually feel sorry for them, because they're in a state of panic right now. They've got this avalanche of apostasy, and it's getting worse because now their lies are being exposed so much that they're being forced to drop their lies and say, okay, this lie has been debunked. If you look, people are saying, wait, what are you talking about? That's why I converted to Islam. Now I converted to Islam because of the miraculous preservation and all the scientific miracles. And now, wait, those are both lies? Why am I supposed to be a Muslim then? Because of what? Andrew Tate? That's your explanation? So it's looking pretty bad for Dawah, but it's going to be fun to watch.
Yeah, definitely. It looks like we're getting about to that time. I actually saw a comment in the chat from Reasoned Answers.
That nerd.
I can't. I think he was just jokingly talking about like you had committed to 8. Yeah, I generally don't keep David a super long time. I think there's more benefit in smaller videos than longer videos, because
you are correct.
If I try to watch like a 4-hour video that somebody did,
not happening with me.
It's just, yeah, it's
I've been trying for, I mean, ever since like Andrew Tate's 4.5-hour video came out on a channel, but he's saying all this stuff that contradicts Islam, and he's saying all this stupid stuff about Christianity that people want to respond to in live streams. And it's like, I've gotten through like half of it, and I've been trying to get through it. I can't listen to a 4.5-hour live stream. But with that said, some people can. Some people do. Some people do like sitting there and hanging out and talking for hours and stuff. So people have different people like different video styles. So some people like short 5-7 minute videos. Some people are good listening to a 45-minute live stream or podcast, and some people do like to hang out for 4 hours or 8 hours or something like that. And so it's good we have all the different formats.
Yeah, and now that I'm on my feet, you know, a lot more now, way like months removed from the surgery. Like I'm doing driving, I'm, you know, doing work, I'm coming home, doing all these things. So I am always moving. So I do appreciate like some of the more interesting 4-hour streams as I knock them, because it's good to have that audio in the background. But if anyone would like to join me too, we're on this Clubhouse app. We do debates. Currently, I'm tackling atheism, so those rooms are definitely not PG-13. Just fair advice if you look me up on Clubhouse. It was James's Tired, but since I've been beefing with a gentleman by the name of Darth Dawkins, I switched my name to Jedi is Tired. So,
oh, I thought you were just going to be like, I drank a bunch of coffee and now I'm James is super woke. That'd be funny.
that would be. I mean, it might get the wrong impression about my channel, though.
James is hype.
James is hyped. Yeah, that would be a good one.
That'd be a good one.
All right, guys, I'm going to get ready to end this video as soon as I get over to the credits.
And I'll go ahead and close out with this thought, guys. Your da'i, Muslims who are watching, your da'is have been so massively deceptive, and anyone else, non-Muslims who have listened to the da'is, we're to a point where they have become so incredibly deceptive that anything they say, demand a source. Anything they say, especially, Daniel Hakikachu, any of these guys, when they say, there's a source that says this, show me that. I want to see it, because I cannot trust you guys because you're so deceptive. Just get in that habit. And you Muslims who are watching, that's going to be very uncomfortable demanding sources or evidence from your own guys. But if you want your community to avoid having their faith based on lies, that's what you have to do. You just have to become a little bit more critical, and that will help you in the long run. This is some honest, straightforward feedback. If you do not want to keep getting into the situation where your lies are exposed and people's confidence in Islam is being shattered, if you don't want to keep getting in this position, stop accepting absolute nonsense that you see on TikTok and so on, and start demanding some actual evidence, and then you won't have to deal with that anymore.
Now, that's a great quote to end it on. With all the misinformation and disinformation, you can find a YouTube video to tell you anything now. It's an excellent point to end it on. All right, guys, until next time.
I go hard in the paint, yeah, homie, I'm a saint. Ride or die.